Hello, 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 and welcome to the CLAYSTATION podcast. My name is Sean Jackson. I'm your host here today. Today we have an extremely special guest with you for you. He's not just an Aussie local Aussie legend, but an international one as well. All the way from Japan, we have Euan Craig. Welcome, Euan Craig, to the CLAYSTATION podcast.
G'day, Sean. How are you?
I'm
Thank you for
good.
having me. Not quite sure about the legend, but I think I'm more of a myth.
I think you're one of the most notable Australian ceramicists out there, and in terms of those that are actually doing a lot of beneficial research for our community, it definitely reaches all the way in Australia, I think, especially in the field of ceramics industries.
Yeah, I hadn't realised that. I thought I was just making pots.
Often, the things that we often do often develop into other things elsewhere. So I always try to be careful of what I'm doing, so it doesn't embellish
I
into
mean,
something.
the things we make last for a very long time. You got to realise that somebody's going to be picking up a coffee mug that you've made in 100 years' time. They're not going to know who you are, and they're going to be saying, no, that's a nice cup. So you've got to think, it's not just for today. You've got to think about what's going to be happening in 100 years' time or 200 years' time. Make pots that are going to be relevant to the human condition for the rest of eternity. Well, gee, we're straight into it, aren't we? Yeah, we don't realise where these things end up. You might make, if I was just making coffee mugs, I'd be making, say, 4,000 or 5,000 of them a year. But they go into people's homes, into people's lives. You never know how they're going to be used or how they're going to affect people's lives. And I don't know if I've done any special research that makes people in other potters in Australia's lives any better. But anything that I've researched or done has only been for the purpose of making better pots for myself, really.
I love how a lot of a theme in your, I guess, media explanation of your artwork is that over time, your arts practice had changed quite early on, and you came to a realization how ceramics was, or in terms of your art practice, changed from being center focused to more externally focused. How we are not, as individuals, we're not the center of the universe, and as human beings, we're not the center of the universe, and how everything else affects each other, and not just here today, but throughout the whole of history, as you've already mentioned briefly. I love a lot how that's been explained a lot in your work. And a lot of other points that you go into, you talk about the beauty of nature and the function of beauty. Do you want to discuss whether I'm correct on that, those quotations?
Yeah. It sounds pretty right, but we're at the centre of history, if you like. Right? We're that pivot between the past and the future. And so what we do now has a really important role to play as individuals. But we're not making our pots for ourselves, as I just said. We're making our pots as part of a conversation that goes back to the beginning of pottery making, say, beginning of the Jomon period, 10,000 years ago. A bit more than that, but when you're making pots, you're not making them alone. You're making them in collaboration with the forces of nature. And in an infinite universe, everywhere is equally the center. So the role of a potter is to stay still long enough to find that center. So when you're making pots, you're sitting at the wheel, you're throwing. You've got the amorphous clay, and the clay is wanting to align itself with the forces that are at work on it, like gravity or a centrifugal force or friction, torque, all that sort of stuff. And so you stay still and wait for the clay to align itself with those forces. And then the role of the potter is to stay still and hold their hand in a way that clay will flow into the space where the hand is not and become in a balanced form within the forces that are at work on it. Right? So I'm not making the pot alone. I'm a guide, if you like. I'm a part of nature. I'm the part of nature that looks at itself and says, hey, wow, isn't that cool? And guides the clay into a potential form, which might be a bowl or it might be a cup or whatever. And then through the firing, the forces of nature also finish off that work for me. So I'm discovering something about nature and about myself as well through the process. And when it comes out of the kiln, it's like, wow, look at what nature has done. Look at all these cool things. Look at the way the ashes flow. Look at the way the Igasa marks have flown. Look at the way the glosses fall on the handle. Gee, doesn't that feel nice to hold? Or, yeah, and then I take it back to the kitchen and I put food into it, and it then takes on a new life. And when other people use it and put food on it, it takes on a new life. So like I was saying before, when I'm making pots, I'm not making pots. I'm making breakfast or lunch or something. I'm talking about, through my pots, I'm communicating ideas about the beauty of nature and the nature of human beings as part of nature, as a communication about beauty and about living a good life. And I give them to other people so that other people can have the beauty of nature on their table rather than a manufactured mug, which is like made to the same exacting standards as your toilet bowl, with a cute character cat on it telling you the same dirty joke every day. It's like that doesn't inform you about the human condition. It doesn't inform you about nature. But something that comes from the wood firing, from throwing on a kick wheel, from something which is made from a natural process, tells you something about life and makes each day more rich and fulfilling.
I agree 100%. That humanistic element is definitely lacking in terms of a lot of mass-produced or mass-manufactured items. And I love how the movement or ceramics movement that you're involved with called Mingei, which, if I'm correct, is the art of the people. Is that correct?
That's a good translation.
Yep. Yes. So this movement is very incorporated into this as quoting yourself, being not finished until it's being used, which is something I definitely 100% agree with. I just want to briefly go over a few historical, I don't want to use that word, past points in your life. I've just jotted them down because I thought maybe you might be a bit tired because in the media you've said them over and over and over again. So I'll just I'll rattle them off, and then you can correct me if I'm wrong.
All right. Okay.
Your family's originally, or you were born in Melbourne, Victoria, in Australia. When you were 14 years old, you decided to pursue a path in pottery or in ceramics. And as you got older, you started to get work at local potteries in Victoria.
Mm-hmm.
Around the Bendigo area, if I'm correct.
That's about right. Yeah.
Later on, you did a Bachelor in Ceramic Design in 1985. You started your first studio in Swan Hill. And from a young age, you were influenced by the Mingei arts practice, as we've already discussed. You moved to Japan into Mashiko in 1990, and in 91 you started your apprenticeship with Master Potter Tatsuzo Shimaoka, who is a national recognized treasure. What's the
National
living
Treasure.
treasure? That's right. I wrote NLT and I was trying to think, what did the L stand for again?
Or a living national treasure. It gets translated various ways.
Yes.
It's a Muke Juyo Bunkazai, which means an intangible cultural asset. That's the correct translation.
Beautiful.
A national intangible cultural asset. So if it was like, you have buildings which are national trust buildings, they're a valuable cultural asset for the intangible cultural asset, the Ningen Kokuho, the National Living Treasure system, came in about 1955, I think it was, and one of the first ones was Hamada Shoji, who was one of the founders of Mingei. And it's not about necessarily what you're making, but it's about the skills and the philosophy and the cultural resource which you have inside you. Right? The Hamada became a national living treasure for the Mingei movement, and his number one student was Shimaoka Sensei. And Shimaoka Sensei became a national living treasure in '96, and that was for his Jomon Zorgan, which is it's an incorporation of the rope marking technique from Jomon pottery from ancient times, and Zorgan, which is inlaying of white slip into or coloured slips into a texture onto a pot, and basically incorporating the traditions that come from 10,000 years ago in Japanese culture with a Korean technique of inlay, and then making it relevant to modern society. Yeah, it was really, going back a step, why I became a potter in the first place wasn't about pots, actually. It was about lifestyle as much as anything else. Because, yes, I grew up in Melbourne, but where I grew up in Melbourne was a part of Melbourne called Broadmeadows. I don't know whether you know Melbourne very well. When they took the judges for the most livable city in the world to Melbourne, they never took them to Broadmeadows, I'm sure, because it's not the best part of Melbourne. Trust me on that. And we moved from Melbourne, from Broadmeadows to Bendigo when I was 12. Now, before that, when I was 8, my sister got very sick suddenly. Now, she was in normal 12-year-old going to high school. I was 8. And one day after class finished, all the kids started to leave and she didn't. She was having some sort of seizure. And from that point on, she was intellectually handicapped. And it was some mysterious disease that was gradually eating away at her brain. They said she wouldn't live to be 21. She's going to be 61 next year. But basically all of her, her ability to learn, her ability to do things, to swallow even, have gradually become less and less and less and less. So she's now needs full-time care. But that really affected me because it informed me in a very real way that our potential can at any time be truncated. So you've got to make the most of each day to live as fulfilling a life as you can. she went into the Children's Hospital in Melbourne and into the ward where they have the brain and nerve damage children. And there were babies with spina bifida and anencephaly, but they're born without their brain development. And sometimes they'd be dying in the ward. You'd go in there one day and the next day they'd be gone, or they even die while you're there, and the families are surrounding them, they pull the curtains around. And I was seeing that from when I was 8. And then as my sister got gradually worse, I was living in the house, and I was the youngest of 4. So up until when I left university at 21, I was caring for my sister was a big part of my life, my everyday life. So right from that age, I was asking myself, what kind of life do I want to live? And then when we moved to Bendigo, and I'd been to Bendigo Pottery once on a tour, and I'd seen the demonstration throwers making pots, and I thought, wow, isn't that amazing? Wow, that's like magic. And I never thought of being a potter at that stage. That hadn't entered my head. We went to Bendigo, and I went to a school called Eaglehawk High School, which is a technical high or tech college now. I went from a school in Melbourne where they had drama and music and French language, and where the teachers were saying, Euan needs to go to a better school than this. I went to a technical school where they had motor mechanics and welding and woodcraft and that sort of thing. It's like, that wasn't exactly ideal for me. It wasn't where I had my talents, if you like. But the reason I went to Bendigo was because the facilities in Bendigo were much better for my sister. So making sure that everything was safe and good for her was more important than me going to any specials, better schools. So I went to the technical school, which was the closest local high school. And of course there was bullying, as there always is. But what I also discovered was there was an old stable where the kids in the good old days used to ride their horses to school. There was an old stable in the corner of the schoolyard that had been made into a pottery classroom, pottery school. And I discovered it was really safe there. I could go there for lunchtime and recesses and avoid getting my head punched in by the big kids. And so there was this idea of a very safe haven. And then in 1978, when I was 14, I had to work out what my classes, my course should be, my electives should be for the following year. And we had to do work experience. And I spoke to my careers advisor and my social studies teacher, who was a bloke named John Brumby. You've probably heard of him. He went on to a career in politics, but he was my social studies teacher at the time. And he said, well, what you need to do, Euan, is you need to work out what you want to do long term, right? Work out, write a list of all the things that you want from a career, and find something that matches that. So I did exactly that. I wrote down all the things I was interested in. I was interested in science and art, and I was actually round-shouldered and weak and asthmatic, and I wanted to build up my body because the doctor said, you need to build up your upper body, otherwise you're going to be sick for the rest of your life. So I wanted a job that was going to give me exercise because I really hate sports. And something that's going to use my fingertips and something that I could do for my whole life, because another influence in my life was my father, who died of a heart attack when he was 58 from basically lifestyle disease. And I wanted to live a good, healthy, happy life, living each day as if it was as richly as possible, but making plans so I could live my entire life happily. So I wanted a career that I wasn't going to retire from. So what I wanted to do when I'm 90 is what I wanted to be doing right from the start, not do a job I hate or find relative satisfaction in, but make money from, and then retire and be too sick to do it, to do what I really want to do. So I wrote up my list, and I then put it beside a list of available careers and crossed off all the careers that didn't fit my list. And the only thing left was pottery. That was it. So when I said I wanted to do work experience with a potter, my art teacher, her husband was Gary Bish in Bendigo. And she said, oh, I'll ask Gary. And Gary took me on for work experience. And then he was kind enough to let me do part-time work with him on weekends and school holidays. And I went on from there.
At that time, because at this time we're talking about what's that? Early 80s?
1978 was when I first started working with
late
Gary.
70s. Yeah. So obviously the times have changed a lot since then. Because to try to find a apprenticeship or a trainee program as a production potter in Australia is a needle in a haystack. How common what was it like back then?
I think when I first was going to university and things, I think that was the end of those traineeships. Jeff Madams did a traineeship with Gary not long before I went and did that work experience with Gary. But it changed a lot after that. I mean, I never had a apprenticeship with a potter in Australia. I just did some part-time work with Gary. When I was 17, I was done the TOP Art and Design course at Bendigo TAFE, and then gone into the degree in ceramics at Bendigo, what was Bendigo Advanced Education, College of Education at the time, now the Latrobe University. I don't even think they have the ceramics course there anymore as an individual thing. And at 17, when I was doing the course at the Bendigo University, I got a part-time job at Bendigo Pottery as a demonstration thrower, doing demonstrations for the tourists, which is what I first saw when I was a kid. And that's what attracted me to pottery in the first place. But also at trade shows and places like the Bendigo show, where you have a display of Bendigo pottery and you have a stand with a wheel and the thrower sitting there making pots. That was my part-time job, and doing those sort of things. I did a little while at a place called Canny Ridge Pottery in Harcourt. And there were a lot of potteries around at the time that were quite busy, that were making pots and large numbers of pots, hand-thrown, handmade. But by the time I finished my degree in 85, they were getting fewer and far between. By the time I came to Japan in 1990, a lot of them had closed down. Bendigo pottery had gone from being hand-thrown to being mainly mould-made, gone from the beehive kilns, the salt kilns, to gas kilns or electric kilns. The craft pottery industry and the training system that had been available before that had just about vanished.
The reason
I don't know what happened after that.
The reason I ask is that a lot of people aspire to go into full-time pottery, or they're interested into going to full-time pottery or develop a career in ceramics full-time. And a big concern upon people's minds is how financially stable or career-wise, how stable it is as a career long-term, because you were talking about you wanted something that you were going to start young, develop into a long-term career path, And then with the dwindling positions and training available and the dwindling courses, do you feel there's still a future for those or an applicable industry in functional ceramics?
Yep, I think there's a great future for pottery. I think that people are realizing now, and the pandemic is helping that, realizing now that they don't want to live like robots. People really want to connect with other people and connect with nature, to have beautiful individual handmade things. And I think there's a great potential, particularly with social media and being able to sell online, to promote online, to educate online, to bring the user, the purchaser, into their studio to help the purchaser understand how the pots are made, why they're made that way. There is because of the political situation which has caused university courses in ceramics to be less funded and therefore gradually disappear. I think there were 9 ceramic courses in university courses in Victoria when I was doing my degree, all around the place. I think there's none now. I think the last one closed a couple of years ago in Melbourne, and as a degree course. So the training, the training isn't there. The university training isn't there now. So places which are teaching pottery classes have got to take up that role of giving people a higher level of skill. They sort of start them at the beginning and they've got to work up. I don't know whether the TAFE courses are still working in Victoria. A couple of years ago when I went to Sydney, the TAFE course at Hornsby was really good. So I think that there's the training potentially is there. But once you've got your training, once you've got the basic skills, going out there and making a living is quite hard at the start. There are people who do it really well. People who do a fantastic job. There's who use Instagram and social media to promote their work, have these online sales that sell out straight away and things like that. But I was never very good at that. I don't even have an online shop that works practically. It's very difficult. I'd rather be out in the studio making pots, having exhibitions when exhibitions are possible. These last couple of years, because of Corona, all the exhibitions were cancelled. I used to have, on a busy year, I'd have between 7 and 9 solo exhibitions around Japan. And last year, everything was cancelled. I had 1 solo exhibition, which made it quite difficult. But in terms of a long-term plan, I didn't expect to make a lot of money when I first started. I expected to make a subsistence living. My pots were priced fairly cheaply. I made lots of pots. I could make 300 mugs a day, and I was only charging like $5 a mug. And at that time, I was doing okay. I had the pottery at the Pioneer Settlement in Swan Hill, so there were a lot of tourists coming through, up to a point. The tourism dropped off a lot towards the end, but I'd also sell to wholesalers. I made a lot of aroma pots actually, because there was a big boom in aroma pots and aromatherapy at the time. But that wasn't really satisfying for me. I wanted to make pots that were more about the art of function, about bringing beauty onto the table rather than making things just sold. And I also realised early that by the time everybody else was retiring, people my age, right, in a normal job, you earn the money you need for the rest of your life by the time you retire, right? And then you retire and that money starts coming in dribs and drabs. By the time I get to that age, I'm 57 now, so I've still got a few years left. I should be starting to earn the sort of money that they were earning at the end of their careers, and then starting to earn more. Because the older you are, the better you are, the higher your prices, the better your reputation. I should be okay when I'm 90.
Should be.
I shouldn't have to make so many pots, and I should be able to charge more for them. And I mean, that's my long-term plan. Is, you know, you put up with not being able to buy luxuries when you're young, and then as you get older, and you've got kids. I've got 4 kids. I've got 2 at university at the moment. Sorry about the 2 at university at the moment. And we're making ends meet. We're getting there. It's been hard this last year because of the coronavirus, but we get there. No luxuries, but it's amazing what a good life you can live, what a rich and fulfilling life you can live, living on a shoestring.
Do you feel any of your children might be following in your footsteps?
My youngest son has decided he wants to be a potter. Which I find very flattering, actually. And I think it'll be easier for him than it was for me, because he's got a father who has already built a reputation as a potter. Mm. He's got all the equipment and everything set up. So there's no establishment fee, and it's all ready for him. There's potentially an established clientele. And all the mistakes that I've made getting this far, he won't have to make, because I'll be standing and putting my hand over his shoulder saying, now listen, son. He's only, 16 now? So whether he actually does end up being a potter or not, who knows? If he doesn't, great. All I want is for him and for my other kids to live a happy and fulfilling life. Mm. And that doesn't necessarily mean doing what you're good at. I mean, I wasn't necessarily good at pottery. I was crap at pottery when I first started. But that doesn't matter. If you love doing something, if that's what you want to do, then if you do it long enough, you'll get good at it. So,
in Japan, a lot of potteries are passed down through generations. I guess traditionally, I guess. Did you have any, because of your strong connection to Japanese culture or the industry in ceramics, did you feel or hope of any possibility of that happening within your family? Because I definitely feel it in mine.
It's a nice idea. I like the idea of having a dynasty of potters. When I was down in Kagoshima 5 years ago, doing a documentary for NHK on Satsuma pottery, I was introduced to 2 potters who were 14th generation potters. Mm. Their ancestors were brought over from Korea by the shogun. And if I don't know whether you know about the history of that time. Yeah. In the junior high school history books here in Japan, they teach about how the shogun sent the samurai over to subdue Korea and to kill everybody. And there was a bounty on the Koreans' heads, but they'd have to bring back proof that they'd killed them. So it was too many heads for them to carry back in their ships, so they just brought back piles of noses. The only people they didn't kill were potters. They brought them back whole and used them to make the teaware and the pottery in Kyushu. And these 14th generation potters are the descendants of those Korean potters. I like the idea of of that tradition of roots. But at the same time, I don't want to have my children feel that they are bound into following in a mold that has been made by their forebears. Heredity does not give you an automatic talent in making pots. Just because you've got 40 generations of potters behind you doesn't mean you've got any talent in pottery at all. The sins of the fathers aren't necessarily visited on the sons, I'm sorry. So there are potters I know who are second and third and fourth generation in Mashiko and places like that, who really don't want to make pots. And they really don't feel confident in making pots, and they might rather be gardeners or something else completely. But they've got to be a potter. And they've got to, some of them, not all of them, some of them, they've got to work in the style of their ancestor, because their ancestor was the one who made this particular style. And that can be very restricting. And I don't want my children's lives to be restricted by my actions or by my achievements. I want them to go on and do something that only they can do. Because each individual person, as they live their life, they see the world through their eyes in a completely different way to anybody else who's ever been alive in history. Nobody else can feel what they feel. Nobody else can see what they've seen. And they have a potential which is completely individual, completely new to them. And so I want my children to go on to do whatever it is that will make them feel fulfilled, to live a happy life. I think that goes with any potter or any artist or anybody as well. I mean, with pottery, trying to make something which is individual is actually counterproductive. What you should be doing is trying to make something that you think is beautiful, because what you think is beautiful is a completely individual perspective. And so if you make an honest pot about what you feel is beautiful, it will be individual as a consequence.
Right.
Without having to try and be different to other people.
Yep, that's I think that hits the nail on the head.
It's a pretty big target, yeah.
It's true. I think a lot about it. Because I think a lot of people think about things, and like there's big differences between like traditional or Eastern ways, and like the Western ways are again completely different. And then there's different individual perspectives, and then there's a broader perspective. And I like how you've sort of found a unique way of looking at it, and at least enabling options and giving the next generation freedom to do or develop themselves into what they want, but at least have options and foundations available to them. So it's a much better position to be in than being with nothing. That's a lot of people are.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about the differences between East and West, and how Japanese people are thus and how Australian people are thus. I think those generalizations are pretty dubious at the best of times. Because I mean, if you look at just siblings, I mean, I don't know if you've got any siblings, but even people who've grown up in the same country, in the same town, in the same family, with the same parents and shared DNA, will have completely different sets of values. Right? So to try and say that Japanese people and Japanese culture is thus, and that the Japanese people believe such and such, isn't entirely true. And having lived in Japan for 30 years, having a wife who was born in Japan, and having children who share both an Australian heredity and a Japanese heredity, I have come to understand that people really are just people, that individuals are not defined by the culture they live in. There are preconceptions which are instilled in people by language or religion or just general social culture, which means that, for example, sculpture and fine art sometimes doesn't translate very well because there's a vocabulary which exists within a culture which communicates ideas within that culture, like puns only work within a certain language. You can't translate them. The same thing with a lot of cultural symbolism. So things that I was making sculpturally, which I thought were about beauty, struck fear into some Japanese people because of their religion and their belief in ghosts and in the existence of the soul post-death. So things which had a realistic face to them, for example, would be terrifying for some people. And I realized that those sort of cultural vocabularies that we have don't translate well. And I wanted to create something which translated across every culture. So, okay, what do we find that is common for all people? And for example, sunrises, sunsets. Everybody will look at a sunrise. And regardless of culture or ethnicity, language, education, sex, you name it, any human being will look at it and go, isn't that beautiful? And there's a basic commonality, a common ground that all human beings, I think, understand about themselves, human beings as part of nature, about the perfection of the beauty of nature. And the perfection of the beauty of nature is not about sameness. It's about the infinite variety of perfection. Never two sunrises or sunsets the same. Even the same sunrise will be different from second to second. There are no two leaves on any tree that are the same. There are never two fish in a school of fish that are the same, even though they swim together and make beautiful patterns in the ocean. And so trusting nature to help me make pots which are each one an individual thing. So if I was saying about my coffee mugs, if I make 5,000 coffee mugs, they're not going to be 5,000 identical coffee mugs. They're going to be 5,000 individual coffee mugs, each one a separate and complete statement about how I feel about the beauty of nature. And with culture, that's why I make functional pots, because that sort of beauty is the sort of beauty that doesn't rely on puns and on cultural types. And people have hands, they hold handles, they drink, they eat. They touch these surfaces and they look at these colours. And there are 5 senses that can be touched by art. This is an installation. It's not an installation where the customer, the client or the viewer goes into an environment you've created. What it is installation which has entered their life and that they becomes a part of their environment every day. And it doesn't matter whether they're Japanese or whether they're French or South African or whatever. People will touch it and drink from it, and they will have a connection, a direct connection between my fingers, which have touched this clay, and their fingers, which are touching this clay. It's communication about those ideas. And then when they get to put food in it or drink in it, or if they put cappuccino in here, or if they put a sashimi on a plate, or if they use the same plate to put a curry on, they're adding an extra dimension to that work. They're completing it. They're putting their voice to it. And each time they use it, it'll be used differently. It'll be a new conversation. And I think that's why I make functional work, because I'm trying to communicate ideas about human beings being equal, human beings of all races and colours and sexes. and that borders are complete nonsense. And that we have a common ground and we can communicate with each other, not just over borders, but also over time. And so the pots that I make, I hope, will be relevant to human activity, human society, for centuries to come. Just as the pots from hundreds of years ago are still relevant today. Tea bowls, for example, from the tea ceremony, which have been used for 400 years, are still relevant, still beautiful. And I think that's really what I want to convey. And one of the things which I have learnt, absorbed from studying with Shimaoka sensei and with interacting with people who do things like the tea ceremony or ikebana or Japanese cuisine. I don't know whether I've answered your question or not. I think I've probably gone off a tangent, but
No, you're right. You're right. It's good to cover a lot of different things. After all, it's just a casual yarn here. It's just no particular direction. But one thing I guess that marriage has sort of taught me is that there's our expectations and there's our realities, and that our only constants in the world is change. So when it comes to our ceramics career, there's our own expectations and there's the realities. And as you say, a lot of people have expectations about what particular type of people are like, or what particular methods or practices are like. And then when it comes down to the realities, it could be what they thought, or it could be something completely in a different direction. But then I guess that just comes to our own practice.
I know people that come to Japan expecting everyone to be Zen. Everyone to be a tea master and everyone to appreciate the sound of one hand clapping. But it's not like that. And a lot of people have come and they've been really disappointed because it wasn't that. And other people who have gone into a certain special segment of Japanese society and they've found that the people there really appreciate it, and that's where they've gone, and that's good too. But there's all sorts of people in the world. There's all sorts of people in Japan, and they all have their valid ways of looking at the world. And yeah, with expectations, I mean, expectations, desires, those things that we expect from life, like, you know, some people expect money.
Or a superannuation.
I started off with nothing and I still have most of it left. But I mean, I can't reach far enough to express all the things that I really want to do. And then there's all these things that I have to do. And then this is all that I can do. So you work with what you can do and you try and fill that space as richly as possible.
That's a good way to look at it.
Yeah.
You mentioned briefly about how your gallery exhibitions have dropped down significantly because of the coronavirus. In Australia, a lot of stuff's been eased off and things are, I guess, almost back to normal. But how are things like in Japan? From what I hear, just from my own family circles, that it's still quite strong and active in Japan. From your experiences, is there a lot of stuff that's been affected, or how has it affected your business?
Yeah, it's affected everything really badly. Oh, not everything. I mean, if you're employed by the government and you're a wage earner, then in actual fact, incomes have improved in the last year because of stimulus packages and things. So there's a lot of people who are getting their normal wages, and they're also getting extra bonus from the stimulation packages, and that's fine. For people who are like me, artists and galleries, and people who are depending on exhibitions and people being able to come to places, restaurants, it's really, really hard, really hard. Tokyo, Osaka, and a couple of other prefectures, the 4 prefectures which are currently in their 3rd state of emergency. And the Mashiko Pottery Festival, for example, which a couple of years ago had their 50th anniversary, been cancelled the last 2 years. And that should be on right now. Normally, I wouldn't be at home now. Normally, for the last 28 years, I've been in Mashiko at the Pottery Festival with my wares on display with 30,000, some June, yeah, 30,000 tourists coming through every day.
Wow.
All of whom are interested in pottery, otherwise they wouldn't be there.
Mm.
And it's a wonderful, rich environment where you get to talk to all these people who don't know you, but who are interested in pottery. And you talk about why you do it, and they talk about why they're interested in pottery. And I really miss that. I miss the exhibitions. But there's a few small exhibitions starting to happen. I delivered some pots to an exhibition in Tokyo day before yesterday, which has started yesterday. But it's not like my normal exhibitions. It's a very small one. It's at a restaurant in a National Trust building in Mingei in central Tokyo. And it's me, a bamboo artist who makes the tools, the spoons and the brushes and things for the tea ceremony, and a textile artist who makes the little bags for the tea wear out of kimono cloth, and a glass artist. And it's only a 4-day exhibition, and during the exhibition they'll be doing a tea ceremony, full tea ceremony for a select number of people. Right? They sell tickets for that. That's another thing. And they'll have displays of ikebana in my pots, the flower arranging in my pots, and in the glassware, in the tokonoma, the special. There's a special space in Japanese rooms where they have a piece of calligraphy and they have a flower arrangement. And it's putting the pots in context by using the actual pots that are on display in the exhibition, and the teaware and the bamboo ladles and that, to put in context for the clientele. And it's a very limited number of clients coming to it. Normally, when I have an exhibition in Tokyo, and I've been having an exhibition at the same gallery in Tokyo since 1993, and the gallery there is actually a dealer in antiquities. They've been in business since 1672. We're talking about generations. The current owner is the 10th generation owner. And they moved from Kyoto in 1870 with the Meiji Emperor, because they're purveyors to the imperial household. And they take away the antiques and just leave the furniture there and put my pots out on display in this gallery with all the antique furniture. And there's a tea room at the back of the gallery. And during the daytime, people come in, and it's right on the corner on the main road of Nihonbashi in central Tokyo. Nihonbashi is the center of Tokyo. It's the center of Japan. Everything, when it says 1,000 kilometers to Tokyo, it means 1,000 kilometers to that bridge. Right? And this gallery is like, it's fantastic, but I hate cities. And this one little gallery is like an island of peace and serenity in the middle of this bustling metropolis. And at night, when we close the gallery, I put my futon out in the tea room, and that's where I stay. This is my little holiday home in the middle of Tokyo. But I'd have, when I have a big exhibition there, and I do collaborations with a couple of restaurants in the area, I might have 400 pieces in the exhibition. And there's hundreds of people coming through the exhibition every day. I'll make an extra, be a couple of hundred pieces for each of the 3 restaurants that I might be doing a collaboration with in a big time. This time, this exhibition is only 85 pieces, which is a really small exhibition for me. Mostly teaware. I'll be interested to see what happens.
Because of
you never know.
Because of the coronavirus, as you've mentioned, a lot of people have been sort of forced to go to selling online. Have you made that shift yourself?
Which is that?
Have you made the shift to selling online? The thing that you've mentioned you've dread
Not really.
to do.
Yes, it's my nemesis. I think the problem with me working online is I can't just put up a photograph and then have people be able to go click, 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 click and buy one of a dozen of these things.
Right.
Each individual piece has to go up there with 3 or 4 photographs and an explanation. And they buy that piece and that's gone, and I've got to do that for every piece. So if I put up 30 pieces, there's got to be 100 photographs. So taking the photographs and the actual nuts and bolts of actually putting that up on a site, of getting the site looking professional, packing the pots up and selling them and sending them to the other place, all of these things take up time. And I can sit down at the computer. If I open up the computer in the morning to answer an email or do anything like that, my studio time up until lunchtime is gone, basically. And that's not why I became a potter for. So I'm struggling with that. I really am. I know that I should. And I occasionally get people contacting me saying, can I please buy some of the pots that I see on your Instagram account? And I say, yeah, which ones? And I'll send them off to them, and that's fine. But it's really hard to send pots internationally at the moment as well because of corona restrictions. I have a very good client friend in Sydney who purchased some pots this time last year, and I was going to send them by EMS. There is no EMS, there is no airmail, there is nothing except surface mail going to Australia now from Japan. So if I have a box of pots, I don't really want it to be 2 months in transit, because you never know what might happen in that space of time. So it's very difficult to send pots overseas at this time. I need to work on it. I've been promising, threatening to have an online gallery for years. And there's people sort of say, yeah, when's it going to happen? When's it going to happen? And one day it will, maybe. I need to be cleverer online, so I'm not.
It's all right. Maybe get people to put a bit of their own energy to come down and get them off you directly. And they'll appreciate it a bit more.
Yeah. Oh, you really need to touch a pot. You need to hold a pot. You need to pick it up and say, oh, yeah, look at how the ashes going on there. So, look at the foot now. That's really nice to hold. And you can't see that. You can't get that from online. It's a bit difficult.
That's the beauty about ceramics compared to other art mediums. It's very sense-oriented, and it's hard to convey that online. Going back again from your training, your apprenticeship, as we mentioned, started in 1991, and then later on, after finishing that, you started your first studio in the Mashiko area, I believe.
Yes.
And then in 2011, there was the Great Earthquake of Japan, and your kiln suffered severe damage and was destroyed. And then with your own family, you moved to Minakami, where you're currently residing now. How's your new studio being set up? Is everything going well where you are, like in terms of facilities and everything?
Yeah, the new place is actually, in many ways, it's more like my original ideal was. Because you mentioned the Mingei movement. Um, Minshu Teki Koge, which means democratic art, literally. And it's about, it's not traditional art. There's a confusion that's saying that Mingei is about tradition. It's not really. Traditional craft is a separate thing, and there's a traditional craft movement in Japan as well. Mingei is about what made traditional crafts beautiful, which was they weren't about ego. They were about using the materials at hand, living in a lifestyle that was in harmony with nature, and using the nature of the material, bringing out the nature of the wood or the fiber or the clay or whatever, into objects which were designed specifically for other people, the people of your family, the people of your community to use. And so they were beautiful in the same way that, say, a vegetable is beautiful or a flower is beautiful. They weren't about, hey, look at me. They were about fulfilling a purpose. Now, this place I've got here was built in 1872 or 3. And it's an old farmhouse. It was built for breeding silkworms, actually. And the timber it was made from was from the local hills, and it's all been hand adzed and put together. It's designed to move in earthquakes, very stable. And you see the paper screens behind me. On the other side of that paper screen is my studio. The old house, the traditional houses have got an entrance hall somewhere near the middle, and then they've got an earthen floor area, a work area. In the old farmhouses, they used to have the animals and the stables on one side of that earth area, and on the other side, you had to step up onto a floor, and you'd have where the family lives. So that's what we've got here, basically. And you come in the front door, you've got this earthen floor area and the stables, which is where I have my shelves, my pots, and I have my wedging table, and I do a lot of the dirty work on the earth floor. I've fixed up a lot of the stuff that was wormy and termite ridden and that sort of thing. I've replaced bits of the floor, but I built the flooring into the throwing benches. So my kick wheels are set into the bench, into the floor, and you can lift off the lids, and there's the wheel. And then when you finish, you wipe everything down with a wet cloth so there's no dust, and you put the lids back, and you've got a floor again. And then the top part, there's a display area where people can come in, take their shoes off, and have a look at the pots around the ash pit, where the charcoal pit, where you have the kettle hanging down from the hook. And in winter, we have the charcoal burning in there. It's pretty cold here during winter, but inside the house here with wood stoves, it's really, really comfortable. And one of the things that I have gone out of my way to do here, particularly after the Fukushima nuclear power plant blew up, was to get off the addiction that modern society has to electricity and get back to making pots like they did in the good old days. I have a couple of kick wheels. I've set them up so that they're right near the windows. We have a well out the back where I can go out and scoop out water for the pottery. I wedge everything by hand. I have a wood kiln, as you may know. And I can make my pots without turning the power on. In fact, every now and then I'll go to the breaker and turn off the power and just spend all day quietly making pots without any electricity at all.
I love how you're, for people listening, that you actually are quite notable in terms of kiln building design, and that your current kiln you've designed to be earthquake proof.
Yeah, I learned the lesson from the last kiln. See, I love wood firing, and for reasons I've mentioned. I don't want to use fossil fuels.
Right.
A potter said to me once, got it from Shigaraki, he said, if you're concerned about the environment, you should get up a pottery. And I think there's something wrong with that idea. I felt you should be able to make pots. I mean, they've been making pots for 10,000 years, and up until the last 100, it hasn't really done that much to the global environment. Right? Back in 1984 at the Potters Conference in Melbourne, there was a discussion about the environment. That was where I first heard about global warming and the greenhouse gases. And somebody said, oh, the amount of greenhouse gases that are made by potters from their kilns in Australia, the total amount is less than the amount of greenhouse gases that comes out of a jumbo jet aircraft engine in 1 hour. So we shouldn't have to worry about it. And I don't think that logic is correct. I think that everybody, in every way they can, should be doing their best to avoid using fossil fuels for obvious reasons. I wrote an essay about it, probably find it somewhere. But I wanted to get off fossil fuels. I wanted to work with wood firing, not just fossil fuels, but also because of the beauty that's imbued by the natural wood ash flame flow and the interaction with those natural forces. But the traditional kilns, Noborigama, Anagama, and I've fired lots of different sorts of wood kilns, they're really difficult to fire on your own. Even Shimaoka's kiln, it was a 5-chamber climbing kiln, and it was a short fire. It only took 3.5 days to fire. Used 10 tons of wood, all red pine, and it was a great experience to do that. But I couldn't fire a kiln on my own for 3 days. It's just not physically possible. Now I didn't have any deshis or employees or workers to help me. And it's not that I don't have any friends, but you can't always rely on your friends to be able to fit in with your schedule. So logically speaking, if you're going to be making pottery as a career and you want to be able to fire regularly without having to depend on anybody else's schedule, you really need to have a kiln that you can fire on your own. Such a beast really didn't exist. The Olsen fast fire and those sort of things were okay, but they're not really big enough for a professional studio. So I wanted a kiln that was about 1 cubic meter, right? That would take about 400 pots, fire it once a month. I designed a few kilns that didn't work. I designed it, built it, fired it, didn't work, knocked it down, redesigned it, fired it, didn't like it, knocked it down. Ended up with a double mouth downdraft fast fire kiln. I got a lot of advice from David Stutchbury, who used to be at the University in Bendigo, and then redesigned the kiln for my own purposes here. And I can fire this kiln, and my conditions were I wanted to be able to fire it in 14 hours, because I figured that was, I filled it 15. I figured that was about how long my energy could last over the long term. And to use recycled timber. One of the problems with the red pine is that the red pine has been cut out, and there's also a grub which is eating the red pine moving up the archipelago. So Mashiko was getting all of its red pine from Fukushima, just further north. And then when the nuclear power plant exploded and the fallout contaminated all the forests, you can't use the wood, because if you burn wood that's got radioactive materials on it, it gets concentrated to 400 times the concentration of radioactive materials. that ash then melts on the pot. So you got pots that glow in the dark.
Make people sick.
Yeah. So, but once I got this kiln firing, I can use any scrap wood, 14 hours firing to cone 12. That's cone 10, 11, 12, right? And so I get up in the morning, light the kiln, 7 o'clock, and I'll close it up at 9 o'clock in the evening, and then go to bed. Once I've got the kiln built and designs all sorted out, I published them in Ceramics Technical.
Yeah, I was actually trying to track down that particular article you wrote about the radioactive ash, but I couldn't find it exactly. Last time we talked, I think you mentioned it was on a blog somewhere.
Yeah, I'll send you a link to that blog.
I know you've written, for people listening, that you've also written a lot of interesting articles about ceramics and their materials, and my favorite one is actually called Responsible Wood, that comes down to what you're talking about just now about sustainability in terms of firing.
Yeah, I've got somebody at the front door there. ちょっとすみません、眠たらないです。
That's all right. We have gone over time.
Yeah, well, Responsible Wood is on my homepage, and I'll send you a link to the blog which has got the radioactive material information on it, and you can put that on the site for people to go to if you want to.
Sure.
And if anybody's got any questions about anything which we've talked about, then they can ask. You know where to find me.
Yep. I just mentioned now that people can find you on Euan's website, which is Euan Craig. That's euancraig.web.fc2.com. That's his official website. You can also find him on Facebook at called the Euan Craig, the Potter in Japan, and also on Instagram, which is Euan.Craig. That's EUAN.CRAIG. Euan, thank you so much. I do apologize for going over time and taking you away from your family and guests.
No, not a problem. If it hadn't been for this delivery man, I'd be able to talk for another half an hour. But...
Likewise.
Okay, I look forward to seeing you again sometime, mate.
Cheers. Thanks you very much.
Okay.
Cheers. Bye.
Yes, bye.